Well, if you're watching this on Facebook, welcome. We're delighted that when you find us, it's been amazing how many have. Some weeks it's been as many as 12,000. And I think it was a little less last week. And there's one or two that are watching each week. And you might remember that last week we had Stuart here who gave a testimony, and people found that very helpful. But during the week, somebody has said to me, "John, you've never said anything yourself. Haven't you anything to say?" I said, "If I start, you'll never shut me up." There's so much. But I thought I would just share something. Only a few minutes, and then I'll go into the talk today. When I was called back to be the pastor of this church, way back in 2015, people said to me, "John, you're a nut. You're mad. Nobody knows the old meeting house." You know, there was only just one member who's still here today. Wonderful. Thank you, Tim, for your faithfulness. And the church had just £200. There was no income for me, then or now. People said, "Give up. How are you going to survive? I still have a mortgage. How are you going to keep the church open?" But I had God speak to my heart, and I have faith in a God who is so big that he holds this world in his hand. And I knew, and I still know, that God is in the process of performing an amazing miracle. I have my moments. You know, I'm going to be, in July, a grandfather at the age of 73. Moses was 80 before he started his ministry, so I haven't started yet. But my daughter, Rose, my only daughter, is having her first child, and so thinking about pregnancy and gestation and this sort of thing very much in my family at the moment. And I guess some of you who are listening are mothers, and you know what it's like to have carried a child, how they kick you and make you feel uncomfortable. And even some dads may have felt the bump. And, you know, different creatures take different lengths of time with gestation. Human beings, it's 9 months. But for an elephant, I gather it's 22 months. Can you imagine what it's like to be pregnant for 22 months? You see, I've been pregnant, not figuratively, that God is going to do an amazing blessing. And the longer you wait, the greater the blessing it will be. But what about an eagle? Well, an eagle has to incubate its eggs for something like 35 days. Now, with human beings, we can at least feel the baby moving. But what's it like for an eagle? They sit on an egg that doesn't move. They can't feel a heartbeat. They can't feel anything kicking. They've got to keep it at a constant temperature for 35 days. And even then, they're not quite for sure that the egg is fertile. You see, I think all of us have things that we're waiting and praying for. For me, my great heart is to see God bring revival, not only to the old meeting, but to our nation. And I do believe that God is setting things up for something amazing to happen. Well, I'll share more another day, but I hope that gives you a little flavour. I also have to have a great deal of faith because I'm not born a preacher. Do you know, I went to 9 schools and I left without any qualifications whatsoever. I had to take O-level English 9 times before I passed. And yet now I've got more letters after my name than the alphabet. But that doesn't make me clever. But I have to depend on God for these sermons and to hear from him what he's wanting to say. And I would value your prayers that I might be faithful and that I might hear what he's wanting to say to you. Well, I have sensed this week that God wanted to talk about angels. And I try to come up with a good title, but I don't know if this is a good one or not. Do angels have ladders? Well, you see, how did they ever get here? I don't know. Do they just fly around? I don't know. You see, I wonder, those of you who do go to church occasionally, when did you last hear a talk about angels? I hardly think many of you had. And I'm sad to say that very few are preached. But they were very important to the early church. And the Puritans certainly believed in them. However, during the time of Charles Spurgeon, which was a time when the German critics were most active, these learned theologians tried to demythologize the Bible, and they thought that they sought to strip out the supernatural. That's a hard thing to do, I might add, as the Bible is a supernatural book. Jesus rising from the dead, which is the heart of the Gospels, is surely a supernatural event. Sadly, in recent years, whilst the church has been quiet, the New Age movement has not. And there have been many books about angels, but these mostly contain false teaching. One title that I came across recently was called How to Talk to Your Angel. Well, this is something that's not taught in the scriptures. I wonder if you realize that there are over 250 references in the Bible to the activity of angels. Well, I do believe in angels. I have never seen one, but I have certainly sensed their presence. And I know many people who come to this chapel also feel the presence of angels very tangibly. I spend some time each week trying to think of a good title for the talk. And based on the verse from Genesis chapter 28, where a ladder was mentioned in the authorized version, I thought you might like the title, Do Angels Have Ladders? I certainly believe angels are not just found in heaven, but they can be encountered on earth. How do they get here? Is it possible that they have ladders or use a stairway? I haven't mentioned the 2 verses that I'm going to be preaching on today. And there's 2 separate incidences from the life of Jacob. The first you'll be very familiar with, Genesis chapter 28 and verse 12. He, that's Jacob, had a dream in which he saw a ladder resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. I think you know that story, don't you? But just a few chapters on, Genesis 32, which is a chapter we read earlier today, verse 1, Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Well, I am going to talk about these two early encounters with angels as found in the book of Genesis. I expect that you might know the story of Jacob's vision at Bethel, but let me remind you of it anyway. I'm going to pick up the story about 20 years after Jacob had had his vision at Bethel. The years since then had been hard and full of constant work. Yet at the same time, they had been years of remarkable prosperity. God had been with him and blessed him in many ways. Now he was rich and he was a rich and prosperous man who owned many herds and flocks, and who also employed many servants who helped to make him wealthy. There are men who prosper and who pay for their prospering by never seeing the angels anymore. They win their fortunes, but they lose their vision and so end up poorer than when they had first started out on their careers. We all know people like that, I expect. But Jacob, for all his cunning and shrewdness, was not a man to lose his hold on God. He had a heart that thirsted after God even when he was prosperous. We now see him on his way home to Canaan. And as he went, the angels of God met him. This was the second time he had encountered angels, as 20 years before he had seen them at Bethel. What I want to do today is to compare these two angelic visits and to show you how they differed from each other and how we can benefit from understanding these differences. To start with then, the earlier angels were seen among the hills, but the second reference shows them on the highway. I wonder if you can picture the scenery at Bethel from pictures that you may have seen or even watched a video on the Holy Land. It was where Jacob saw the ladder going up to heaven. It was a place of wild and rugged landscape. At home in the pasture land of rich Beersheba, he would have seen the rolling, peaceful downs. But the atmosphere was very different in the highlands, where there were rugged cliffs and piles of rocks stacked up here and there. This was a place where Jacob had his first vision of angels. But our second verse in chapter 32 sees him 20 years later when he was walking on a hard and dusty road. Not at all a romantic scene. Now, it seems to me that we can have an experience like Jacob. If we've had our hour at Bethel in the past, we ought also to have our Mahanaim. Most of us have had our moments on the Mount. I certainly had when I was 21, and I spent time on the fells in the Lake District whilst attending the Keswick Convention. It seemed to me back then that heaven was not far away when I was at the top of one of those mountains. Life was still in front of me those many years ago, and the fellowship of the convention was out of this world. So like Jacob, I might have cried, "This is none other than the gate of heaven." Do we have times? Can you remember a time in your life when it seemed like the gate of heaven? Or was that just a youthful thought? It's great. It's a great thing to see the angels then. And life shall never be the same if we've never seen them. Yet as the years pass and life is less romantic and our journey becomes more uneventful. Now here's the thing. If we continue with God on our spiritual pilgrimage, the angels of God will meet us again. God may be near us when we are inspired, but God is just as near when we are faithful. The man who climbs may have his glimpse of heaven, but so has the man or woman who simply pushes on. And that's the test and the triumph of faith. Not that it illuminates golden moments, but that it comes with music and ministry into the dusty, high road of our lives today. We all grow weary, don't we, of routine sometimes. Now more than ever, after so many months of lockdown due to the COVID virus. We are really tempted to break the rules and take our liberty. But it was not when Jacob broke into his liberty that the angels of God met him again. It was when Jacob was on his way and quietly and doggedly pushed on and took the homeward road and did his duty, although he'd been seriously tempted to stop, as indeed we all are at times. I wonder if any of you who are listening today feel restless, who is on the point of giving it all up. Do not do that, as you will regret it, and you are turning your back on all of God's angels. Bethel is in the past and gone forever, but still, like Jacob, you may have your Manaheim and the angels who meet us in the way. Another difference to be noted between Bethel and Manaheim: the first vision came in solitude, whilst the second vision came in society. At Bethel, Jacob was utterly alone. In fact, he was an exile from the old tent where he'd passed the happy days of boyhood. And at the very hour, for it was evening, his brother Esau would be making his way home, where his aged father would be waiting for him, and his mother would be busy in the tent. It is memories like this that make us feel lonely at times, doesn't it? This was certainly true for Jacob. He saw his home again and heard its familiar sounds, and it was night, and round him were the hills. And it was in this hour of solitude when he felt most like crying, and there was no one to comfort him, that Jacob had his vision of the angels. I wonder if you can see the difference at Manaheim. Jacob was not on his own this time. His wife was there, his family was there, and his servants and his shepherds were also about him. The road was far from being quiet. There was the shouting of the drover and the lowing of the herd, and now there was a snatch of song, and now the laughter of happy children, whilst at Bethel there was utter solitude. At Manaheim there was society. The point to notice here is that the angels who appeared in the solitude at Bethel came back again when he was surrounded by people. Angels always do this if we keep in tune with God. They appear to us when we are alone and when we are with others. We are all utterly alone, aren't we, in our own personal walk of faith? But we are never alone with God. We can feel alone in our own heart and with our own sin and our own past failures. No one else can fully understand and enter into our own personal pain and our own cry for God in our lives. But one by one, we are born into the world, and one by one, we are born into the kingdom of God. We are reminded in Scripture that straight is the gate that opens upon life. In fact, it's so straight that two can't go in side by side. And yet, good thing about our faith is that having made our peace with God and accepted Jesus into our lives, we can go on our way in life, and angels will often meet us, even if we're unaware of them. Mannerheim shows us that we can meet angels as we make our way through life with others. Mannerheim always follows Bethel, the hour when we have been alone with God and heard him speak to us and trusted him and seen the shining ladder to the throne of God. Oh, one day will we climb that? Will we be there with God? In closing, I want to show you yet another difference, which is perhaps even more significant. At Bethel, the angels were on a shining staircase or a ladder. At Mannerheim, they were armed for war. I wonder if you can understand the difference. Do you see the parable of God in it? Do you understand why first they climbed the steps and then were marshaled as a fighting legion? So let me try to explain it. Well, can we think of Jacob when he came to Bethel? Can we imagine what was in his heart? He was separated from his father's home, and he felt separated from his father's heart, from his father's God. We need to remember here that Jewish religion was a religion for the family. A great deal of importance was given to the home. So when a man turned his back on his home, it was like turning his back on the promise. And every fresh mile that Jacob travelled not only left him further from his mother, but also left him with a desolating sense that he was further from his mother's God. Such was the past. And what about the future? The future was shrouded in uncertainty. Jacob was not afraid. No young man is afraid when he goes out to battle with the world. But there were the hills, and up them he must climb. And what lay beyond them was totally unknown and so uncertain. Jacob fell asleep. It was then that there shone on him the ladder, and the foot of the ladder was his rocky bed. It rose from the very spot where he was sleeping. So there, where he lay that night, alone among the hills, he was as near to God as at Bathsheba. He felt certain that God was with him now. That is just what Jacob needed. They gave him fellowship when he was lonely. They gave him heaven when he was far from home. They gave him hope for his journey when he didn't know where he might find himself later on. it also helped him to know for sure that God was ordering his way and would never leave him or forsake him. Isn't that wonderful? God is ordering your way and my way, and he's promised never, never to forsake us. Now, let's turn from Bethel to the other scene when the angels met with him again. Do you know what was in Jacob's heart that day? Jacob was full of fear, as yonder was Edom, where his brother lived. His brother Esau, whom he had wronged so terribly years before. Had he not stolen his birthright long ago? Was it likely that Esau had forgiven him for that? And in a little time, he must meet with Esau. And Esau was a man of war. And Jacob had grown soft in his prosperity and was more skilled at bargaining than at battling. He was afraid. His conscience was at work. And conscience, so they say, makes cowards of us all. If Esau fell on him in wild revenge, what hope was there for Jacob and his company? And it was at this point that Jacob saw the angels, and he saw them as an armed host about him. And he heard the rushing of 1,000 chariots and caught the flashing of 1,000 spears. They were not mounting on the golden stair. They were marshaled in the ranks of war. They were not moving up and down the ladder. They were mustered to do battle for him. And that is just the vision that Jacob needed whilst he was so afraid. It made him far more powerful than Esau, for around him were the legions of his God. And so we learn the old and most precious lesson that God reveals himself just as we need him. Is that true for you? Just when you need him most, God will show up. He can give us richly what we need today. Just as water can be poured into 20 different goblets, it will take the different shape of each goblet. So the grace of God is poured into 20 days, and it will fill the different need of each day. And that is why Jesus, who knows the Father's heart, bids us never to be anxious for the morrow. We said the Lord's Prayer today. Do you remember those words? Give us this day our daily bread. When we need the ladder, we shall have the ladder. When we require the army, we shall get it. We shall have grace to live by while we're called to live. We shall also have grace to die by when we're called to die. It was that faith that lifted the heart of Jacob and carried him forward and made him more than a conqueror. And it is that faith which you and I must have if life is to be victorious and serene. My friends, God uses his angels to watch over us. They are lower than us, but God uses them to protect us. He uses them to bring the right people into our lives. There are many, many lessons that we need to learn about angels, but start looking in the Bible. You'll see many. I certainly found these 2 verses from Genesis very, very helpful, and I hope you do too. I do hope you'll come back next week, and I think I'm going to talk about next week the God who cannot hide. Would you come back and listen to that? It may be that you've not seen God, but I tell you what, God's not hiding from you. Anyway, I do pray that God will bless you. Do please like and share, and above all, come back next week and do get in touch. If there's any way I can help, I'd be delighted to do that. God bless.